Hey, deserving listeners, let's continue watching the Stutz documentary on Netflix.
And it was the first step for me in beginning the process of getting better.
Yeah, that's correct. Here's the classic thing that happens. A guy's depressed. He comes into my office and he says, I know my habits are shit. I know I'm undisciplined. I know I'm lazy. But if I only knew what I was supposed to be doing, what my mission was in life, etc.
Okay, it's great. We're hearing an example. I'm worried this is going to be one of those examples of a charismatic therapist that proposes some magical cure that's very brief, that may have worked for that individual, but will probably not work for the majority of cases, and may also not have worked for that individual. It may have temporarily worked, because I've studied people who will propose these brief ideas. I've talked about it previously, but they will talk about how, yeah, I had this client once came in and had this massive phobia about, getting on the train, and then I just told her to walk on the train backwards and it cured her, and that only took 30 seconds for me to provide therapy and saved her a bunch of time and money. And, all those other therapists that want to go into your childhood and ask you about your mother, like, that's all bullshit. That's just a scam to get money out of you. And, these are prevalent ideas. And again, I think and it's all on a foundation of the patriarchy, right? That it downplays womanly things like listening and emotions. It should be strong, and you should be able to just tell people like it is, and just buck up and pull yourself up by your bootstraps and all that kind of stuff. Again, it's not bad therapy, but it's not universally good, is the thing, right? I'm worried that we're going to hear something like that. But so he's going to give us some example of his therapy that worked for someone that I think is going to be brief. Let's watch.
But I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing, so I'm just going to be lazy and do nothing. And then from that, obviously, comes the depression. There's something that will apply to you and to anybody else who doesn't have a sense of direction or doesn't know what they should do next. And the answer is you can always work on your life force. Okay,
so we're hearing his particular brand of therapy. It probably is humanistic oriented, and it might even be literally from humanistic literature. There's a lot of humanistic literature, and I'm guessing in there somewhere over the past 50, 60 years, there's some notion, maybe even termed as life force. I don't know if it coincides with that, but let's watch.
Because your life force is the only part of you that actually is capable of guiding you when you're lost. If you think of it as a pyramid, there's 3 levels of the life force. The bottom level is your relationship with your physical body. The second layer is your relationship with other people. And the highest level is your relationship with yourself.
Okay, I don't have much to say about this model yet. It looks like just a way of looking at things. It's just a model. It's just a way to frame things. It probably works for him and his clients. It doesn't really matter. There's not a scientific basis to what he's saying here. That's okay, of course. It might help people. It might inspire. Another part of this sort of therapy, or really all therapy, I learned this early on in my career. I used to, when I was starting out, I would be in a session, and halfway through, I would feel like I discovered one of the fundamentals of therapy. A lot of the fundamentals of therapy you can't really teach, or if you are teaching, it won't really be absorbed or understood until you actually are a therapist. Being a therapist is 99% experience and 1% graduate school, in my opinion. That's a model. It's not scientific, right? But when I discovered some foundational aspect of therapy, after the session, in between, I'd have to take all my notes and go to the bathroom or something. And then I would write on a Post-it note some phrase that would remind me of this epiphany I had, and then I'd stick it on my corkboard on my desk. And the next day I would look at, I would usually have 1 or 2, if that, little Post-it notes the next day, and I'd look at some of these phrases, and most of the time I had no idea what I meant by it. It was sort of like when you're, high and you say, oh my God, time is a circle, and you write it down and you look at it, you're like, I felt like that was so profound in the moment. Now it's just like this stupid stoner thing to say. It was sort of like that. But sometimes I actually would remember what it was. And one of those things was that therapy is partly about being inspirational. That to be a good therapist, it helps to pay attention to how you can inspire your clients. It's one thing to help them and listen, like if I to stick to the listening portion of therapy or that camp, is a client is telling me about something they're going through at work, and I'm starting to get angry at their boss. I feel like they're being mistreated by their boss. Now, in all likelihood, what's happening is the boss and the client have a dynamic that is, they're both contributing to it. Now, it could be possible the boss is just an a-hole, but sometimes in these relationships, they're both kind of participating. But anyway, and I am empathizing with that part of the client that is imposed upon and injustice is happening anyway. And so as the client is telling me the story, I think therapeutically it'll be helpful for the client to know that. So let's say from the client, I'm not getting any indication that they're angry or that they're upset or that they even believe an injustice is happening. They're just reporting to me what's happening at work, and they don't see it as an injustice. And so instead of me just telling them, well, what you're going through is unfair, like this, just say I say that, right? I'm like, well, it sounds like you're being treated unfairly. Okay. That might help, but it might not. It's not very inspirational, right? Now, if the client is telling me the story and I'm really listening and I'm really absorbing and I'm paying attention to my countertransference, I'm paying attention to my cultural pocket, I'm thinking of the overall treatment goals, and I am thinking, I'm noticing I'm getting angry on the inside. Like, I have an impulse to yell at the boss, or maybe even the client, to say, hey, you need to stick up to that boss because that boss is a jerk face, I'm being triangulated. And I'm noticing all these things as they're talking, and then what I do is something like this. It's hard for me to role play it because I'm not in the moment, but I'm thinking about inspiration, right? I could just say, hey, you're being treated unfairly. Or I could be inspirational, which is to say something like, okay, I got to pause you because my heart, I can feel I'm getting angry for you. You're being treated unfairly. Now, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just your story, but I don't see any anger in you. And that's fine. You don't have to be angry, but I'm not even in that situation, and I'm pissed off at your boss for this and this. I mean, maybe you're biased, but if this is anything close to the truth, like, that's serious bullshit what you're going through. And this isn't the first time you've told me about this. And your parents treated you this way. You've been treated unfairly your whole life. I'm angry at your boss right now. That's some bullshit right there. I don't know what to do about that, but I'm feeling it. Okay. Some of you might be like, wow, that's pretty strong. And yeah, I mean, if I felt like that would be helpful, I might do, there's 1,000 other variations of that. But for a client, presumably that would be more inspirational, more impactful than if I just said, you're being treated unfairly. Again, getting back to my previous discussion about just listening, right? There's being silent, right? If I just was silent as the client is telling me about their mistreatment at work, or even if I just said, wow, it sounds like you are being mistreated at work, without any inspiration or my own emotional reaction, without any authenticity, without any realness to me, genuineness, then yeah, that's not going to feel like very therapeutic. It's not going to feel very inspirational. It's not going to be very transformative. It's not going to be helpful. Whereas if I'm just listening, but I reflect back to them what's going on for me, then that might actually help the client transform. And I've had clients who will tell me years later, even friends of mine or students of mine will tell me, like, there was a time when I told you a story and you got angry on my behalf. And for the very first time, I realized that I had license to be angry, and I've been getting in touch with my anger since that moment. And I just want to thank you for that, because I've been suppressing my anger. I always thought anger was a bad thing. And then you taught me, you modeled for me that anger is healthy and helps us to advocate for ourselves and is the only way to move towards justice. If we don't notice our anger, then how do we know when we're being treated unfairly? Doesn't mean that you come out swinging and commit a felony or something, but you harness that anger for good, Anyway, so inspirational. And I'm guessing for Phil, he is inspirational in the way that he delivers it, right? That he's listening, he's just listening, but he has an inspirational way of communicating. And part of that are these cards, and also part of it is this model. He could be talking about anything as long as it's inspirational and helps people to reflect and value themselves and have other options, break them out of a pattern, then yeah, it probably is helpful.
The bottom step is your relationship to your physical body. All you got to do is get your body working better, and it always works. the most classic thing is they're not exercising. Diet is another one, and sleeping.
So what percentage of that stuff is what makes you actually feel better at first?
Well, when it starts out, it's probably 85%.
Yeah, it depends, case by case. And what he's talking about now is universally accepted in my field. I don't know a single therapist that wouldn't agree with that and doesn't talk about that occasionally. I would say on average, therapists don't talk about it enough because it doesn't feel like core to psychology, right? To talk about sleep or diet or exercise. It seems obvious, but it is well understood, and I don't know anyone who doesn't know those things, but it's important to emphasize that and to remind people of that and to explore the barriers to that. Just telling someone, hey, you need to get better sleep, that's one thing, but to explore, okay, well, why exactly are you having difficulty with sleeping? And I've had many conversations with clients along those lines, and there are thousands of reasons. You'll go online and you'll see these lists of like sleep hygiene and this kind of thing, and those are good, but it's often simplistic. There are so many different reasons. Like one of the reasons that I'll see sometimes is that people will allow their pets to sleep in their bed. And for some people that's fine, but if your sleep is fragile, then having your pet sleep in your bed is not conducive to anyone. Obviously to your sleep and to your health, your mental health, your physical health, your mood, your energy level. But there are cascading effects from that. Like your diet gets thrown off, your gut health gets thrown off, your attention span gets thrown off. Then you start seeking alcohol or caffeine, and that then throws you off. And then you start getting in a bad mood. And then that, it all began with allowing your pets to sleep in your bed. And so what do you do? And then you have to somehow go back in time, because now your pets are expecting to be able to sleep in your bed because they've been doing it for a couple of years. How do you break them of that expectation? It can take time. And then you got to learn how to use behaviorism and training with animals and understand their emotional state and understand how to help them feel comfortable and the routines that animals will go through and pets will go through. That's a whole other skill set that you might have to get specialized help with. It gets complicated. Just telling people, hey, you need to get better sleep, it's way more complicated than that. But yeah, so that's good. So he's talking about the body and making sure that you're getting good sleep, diet, exercise, and that is the first thing that people should do when they're trying to improve outcomes in psychology, which is good advice and, like I said, pretty universally accepted and often talked about in therapy.
Let yourself get pulled back into life. The key of it is you have to take the initiative. If you're waiting for them to take the initiative, you don't understand this. You could invite somebody out to lunch that you don't find interesting. It doesn't matter. It will affect you anyway in a positive way. That person represents the whole human race symbolically.
Great, yeah. He's not presenting anything strange here as well. I would say that a lot of therapists would see it this way, or at least to some extent, that it's important to have good relationships, to socialize, and to also initiate. You can't just wait. You've heard me talk about that before. I've talked specifically about, like for me, I value body and people. I'm guessing we're going to get to ourselves. But for me, I do that as well, that I value socializing and connection with people. And I have gone on a campaign. When I was in my 20s, I heard on the radio that you should have 3 people that you can say whatever you want to whenever you need to. It could be something like you're going through something difficult, or you have something really exciting that happened in your life. You should have 3 people at least that you can talk to about anything, something shameful, something difficult. You're sad, you're depressed, you're upset, you're angry, you're hurt. You should be able to talk to 3 people about those things. And the idea is that all 3 people can give you that support, but also, not everyone's available all the time. So if 2 people aren't available, at least one person will be, that kind of thing. And I remember when I heard that in my 20s, I thought, yeah, I agree with that. And I don't know if I have that right now in my life. I might have 1 or 2, but not 3. And so I always try to follow that. I don't think it's scientific. It has to be 3, right? It could be 1 really good one or 10 10 so-so ones that are, and so someone's always there for you. Anyway, point is that it's just important to have that. And so at the time I thought, if I don't pay attention to this over time, I'm guessing that that's going to slip away from me, because I knew that as people get older, they drift further and further away from their larger social group and their friends. And so I said to myself, I'm going to pay attention to this. I'm going to go on a campaign, a continuous campaign. Because the other thing is sometimes you have a falling out, and if you don't have other people that are ready to slip into that spot that you need, then you might go for 5 years without anyone that's close to you. You know, you can't just say, well, I have one good friend, everything's fine. Well, what if something happens? And then what? Then you've got to so you've got to always be like, okay, who can I depend on? And how do I build that so that when I need them, they are there, right? You can't just say, I need someone. How come no one's there for me, right? You have to start early and say, I'm going to be there eventually, because everyone is. So what do I need to do now? Where do I need to look? How do I need to notice people that might mesh with me well? And a big part of that is accepting that, this is for me, that if I wait or even look for parity and invite, if I'm inviting 5 times and they haven't invited me to anything, then I feel upset, and so I stop inviting them. Now, I might talk to them about it or something, but really, you live this life once, and I don't think on my deathbed I'm going to say like, yay, I made sure that I didn't invite people more than they invited me. I'm like, look, give up on that, because this is really about my needs, and so if that means I have to initiate a lot of the time, if not all the time, then so be it. I'm not that proud of, I don't have that much pride or that much insecurity about myself that I can't be that person. So a long time ago, I just said, I'm going to initiate all the time, and I'm just not even going to think about it. Because almost all the time when I do that, people are ready to go. They're the ones that are waiting. And unfortunately, they probably don't have a lot of people in their life, or they don't have the people they want in their life because they're not initiating with the people they want to. Anyway, so he's talking about that, which is great. And yeah, it's an important foundation to mental health and to well-being.
The best way to say it is to get yourself in a relationship with your unconscious, because nobody knows what's in their unconscious unless they activate it. And one trick about this is writing. It's really a magical thing. You enhance your relationship with yourself by writing, and somebody will say, well, write what? I'm not interested in anything, I'm not a writer. It doesn't matter.
Okay, so I think he's actually in line with his psychoanalytic training. I'm assuming he was trained psychoanalytically, or at least psychodynamically, by the way he was talking earlier. And he's using language that is psychodynamic, the unconscious. And I think he's also talking about free association. His method is to write it out, which is a common method that goes back decades, to free associate, to get to know the self, and to get to know the unconscious. Let's hear the particulars, though, of his technique.
His thoughts are right. The writing is like a mirror. It reflects what's going on in your unconscious. And things will come out if you write like in a journal.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I don't know exactly how he intervenes or how he exactly assigns this to clients, but yeah, this is a well-known idea. A lot of the reason why people wanted me to react to this is they were wanting to know, is this guy on the up and up? How do I see what's happening? And I'm making sure that I point out that a lot of the things that he's saying are pretty mainstream in certain schools of thought. Not to downplay him, because I'm worried that when people watch this, they'll be like, ooh, there's something about this guy that's different or special or something. And there is, of course, but there's things about every effective therapist that is different and special. Because a big mission of mine in life is to help motivate people to go to therapy and to find the right therapist. Not only go, but take the time to find the right one. And a lot of people will go to one and they won't have a good experience for one reason or another, and then they just stop. And that's a huge tragedy, because it's my opinion that at best we will emerge from our childhood needing only 5 years of therapy. And at worst, we need a lifetime of intensive therapy. So it's important that we all get the therapy that we need. I've been through a lot of therapy myself. I can't imagine where I'd be without it, honestly. So I want people to go. And so I don't want people to contrast him with what they believe to be non-him and go like, all those other therapists suck because they don't do this. I want people to know what he's doing is fairly common. Not universal, of course, but common.
form that you didn't know that you knew. These are the three levels of the life force. If you're lost, don't try to figure it out. Let it go and work on your life force first.
Okay, so let's review. He's saying his life force. What exactly does that mean? I don't know what he means by it, but the term and the way he's describing it, it evokes a sense of power, right? That you have this inner source of power, like your own Iron Man generator that emanates power and motivation and goodness and warmth and health. And that's a very humanistic idea. It's core to the humanistic psychotherapy idea. Whenever I lecture on humanistic psychology and therapy, that's the first thing I talk about because it's a big deal. And some people will say like, well, isn't that kind of obvious? And what I'll say is that, well, humanistic psychology was so influential on our culture that it did become mainstream. But originally it was not mainstream. It wasn't the way that humans saw the self. And their influence is so widespread and so pervasive that it appears like, well, that's just how it is. That's just how we think. But originally it was a minority opinion that was propagated by humanistic psychology. So anyway, that's what I think of when I think of life force. It's also inspirational, right, to frame it that way, to feel like, because there are visualization techniques and mindfulness techniques, meditation techniques that involve this to, as you're deep breathing, you imagine, and maybe you can do it with me right now, you can relax your body and your shoulders and, check in, how am I doing? And then you imagine inside of you this warm sun or a warm power generator or a life force or something. It's inside of you and it's radiating goodness and energy and power. And you might even feel something as you imagine that, this radiating, tingling, or I kind of feel it right now, like a feeling of, just like motivation and energy and, I'm ready to go, like, okay, and confidence or something, right? And when you see it that way, it's not actually what's happening, right? But the visualization inspires us, and maybe even our unconscious, to feel stronger, to feel more energetic. It's a well-known phenomenon that we will study, that visualization and inspiration. In another culture, we might talk about how the Holy Spirit is inside of you, or in another culture, we might talk about how the homunculus is inside of you, or I don't know. Or an angel is inside of you, or whatever. It's just a story that we tell ourselves to tap into something that humans will be moved by and will affect our biology. And so for us to imagine a life force and to have that inspirational therapist that can, convince us to really go there for us can do a lot for us. And at no point are you giving advice or talking about your feelings or talking about the past. Those are all good things to do in therapy, but this is another way to help people in the moment. And then if you can help them to do that at all times, another aspect of this is just paying attention to your body, which is a huge important thing. I mean, more and more in our contemporary Western society, mainstream society, we are more and more and more disconnected from our bodies. And I don't say we should be connected to our bodies just because of some religious dogma or something. But I say that because in order for us to know what we need, we have to be paying attention to our bodies. Our bodies are our emotions. Our emotions don't happen in a brain cell. They happen throughout the body. It happens with the brain in conjunction. Brain is the body and the body is the brain, and our nervous system is throughout our body. And our body, one way, if you want to look at it through sort of anatomical terms, is say I see a tiger that is out of its cage, okay? So the photons hit the back of my eye, my brain interprets what's happening. I'm old enough now to know that a tiger could kill me. I have seen movies or clips online where a tiger attacks someone. And so I interpret it as danger. And then my emotion, my brain interprets it as a danger, and amygdala registers it, the emotional centers, the limbic system kicks in, and then sends signals to adrenaline and to cortisol and to, there's various different other hormones that get released in the body. And then there's also the heart starts to race, and then the muscles tense up, and the gut might shut down because we don't need to digest food right now because we're in an emergency. So all these things are happening. And then what we notice in our brain is we notice what's happening in our body. So not only we're perceiving something, then we're having an interpretation of it, an emotional reaction of sorts in the brain, and then that sends all these signals. But then we notice our heart is pounding and our hands are sweating, and we feel alert. Our eyes are dilated, and we now have a different set of inputs on our perceptions that we're noticing, and then we register that as I must be afraid. I must be in danger, right? So sometimes this can be hijacked, right? Like if you drink a lot of coffee and your heart starts to race, your body will notice your heart racing and go, oh, I must be in danger, right? And you might have some fear and some discomfort around that. You're not actually experiencing danger, but your body is interpreting it that way because you have an artificial thing that's artificially raising your heart rate, that kind of thing. Anyway, so the emotion, when we call it fear, the fear feeling is everywhere, right? And there's phases to it. Okay. So when we pay attention to our body, we know our emotions better, right? Our emotions are indications of our needs. The tiger, for example, I have a need to live. I have a need to have all my limbs and not to have claws and teeth dug into my body. That's a need of mine. And so I'm having an emotional reaction of fear to protect me from having that need not met, to having the need of life to be unmet. And so the emotion is telling me what my needs are and what I need to do. I need to run away or something. This is happening throughout the day. Your boss is telling you to do something. Your kids are upset. You're tired. Your partner is distant. There's some worry about finances. You're on Twitter and you hear something that is concerning. Your emotions are happening, which are indicating how your needs are being tweaked. And if you don't pay attention to your body, you won't know what you need, and thus you won't meet your needs, right? Okay. Now, by the way, this is my way of describing it, but so I think he's essentially getting in that direction, I think. Anyway, and then to review, he says, the life force is a pyramid in which you have the body, your connection with people, and your awareness of your unconscious. That top tier is interesting. It's not really in line with the humanistic psychology school. So we might call this some sort of integration of different sort of ideas that he's absorbed over the years. But anyway, so the life force for him comes from making sure that your body is healthy, diet, sleep, exercise, that you have connection with other people. I'd be curious as to what he meant by connection with other people, but that element was briefly touched on. And then an awareness of the unconscious. It's interesting, right? I wonder if he'll expand on that.
It's about passion, increasing your life force so you can find out what you're really passionate about. But step one is to be passionate about connecting to your own life force, and that anybody can do that.
And
Okay, to find your passion, I guess that could mean a lot of different things. What I would interpret that to mean in my language is what I was saying earlier in terms of your needs, that we're passionate about things that align with our needs, whether it's a need for safety, a need for creativity, a need for meaning, a need for a career or something. That's connecting with our needs. That's how I would interpret what he's saying. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself and take care of others because we all deserve it. We really, really do.